In the meantime, former Steinhoff CEO Marcus Jooste did not appear before the committee today after the Cape High Court granted an order for the postponement of his testimony. He will now be before the Oversight Committee on Trade and Industry as well as Public Service and Administration on the 5th of September. National Treasury officials have detailed how their relationship with SARS was strained under suspended SARS Commissioner Tom Moyane's leadership. Speaking at the SARS Commission of Inquiry into Tax Administration and Governance, Treasury Deputy Director General Ismail Momoniat suggested that Moyane contributed to the VAT rate hike. Momoniat explained how government had to increase the VAT rate to plug a ballooning shortfall. Earlier this year, The Economist forecast a 60 billion rand shortfall in tax revenue collection. Momoniat says the VAT hike was a necessary evil to prevent a sovereign ratings downgrade. He says the current VAT rate is likely to add nearly 35 billion rand to the fiscus if there will be no further additions to the list of zero-rated items. The telecommunications sector continues to evolve as changes are introduced in the industry to adapt to disruptive technology and competition from mobile operators. But this doesn't take away from the fact that transformation and women empowerment must be addressed. Telecommunications infrastructure in South Africa provides modern and efficient service to urban and rural areas, including cellular and internet services. Recently, Telkom said a plan to slash the fees mobile firms charge each other to terminate calls on their networks, proposed by the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, could hurt revenue and lead to job cuts. ICASA published draft rules earlier this month on mobile termination rates and fixed line termination rates, a move that could hit profits for operators. While Telkom had to restructure and retrench workers, it has been transforming and outsourcing its maintenance services to the private sector as part of black empowerment programs. But while this is happening, are women getting a fair share in the business? ICASA is dealing with issues of how radio frequency spectrum is allocated and used, facilitating access to essential infrastructure, introducing the principle of open access and enabling the construction of networks. In doing so, are women involved in this modernization and maintenance of this infrastructure? When it comes to ownership, shareholding and control, are women given these opportunities? Well, to reflect in the role of women in the telecommunications sector, we have Jane Nkadimang, who is Director at Debrox Communications. Welcome to our program.
Thank you so much for having me.
How did you get in this sector?
You know, I started about 7 years ago when I started my own training company. The focus at the time was that we wanted to provide ICT training in rural communities. But of course, if you operate in a village, what you then quickly realize is that you don't have good internet connectivity. In most instances, in fact, no connectivity at all. This led to us actually wanting to find out a solution, to get a solution for these communities. And through that process, our business model actually developed, where we actually realized that, you know, cell phone towers play a big role. And of course, we wanted to play in the space of infrastructure ownership. But that requires serious capital. So the best route for us initially was to rather work on maintenance and upgrades of existing infrastructure.
How does it work? I mean, when you talk about maintenance of this infrastructure, it sounds like it's tedious and detailed, and when you pass on the road, you see the poles where there's a gentleman up there tied to ropes and working there. But what are the intricacies of tower maintenance?
So it's very technical indeed, and interesting that you're mentioning that you would see men, you know, hoisted up on these towers. And it's true, for women, we don't have a lot of them maintaining the towers. But certainly what it is that it's either capacity has to be increased. So this is when we can look at the frequencies, radio frequencies, or the microwave that has to be increased. Sometimes also think about the fact that maintenance has to take place. If a tower is old, that means that you either break it apart, but you have to be strategic in how you do that. So either you build from outside or internally, depending on really the engineering of it. So that's the type of work that we do.
So then what was your impression when you got in the industry? Because we know for a fact that this industry has been white dominated and male dominated. For you as a woman, when you came in, what was happening?
Well, certainly that is the reality. And I am still living that reality at the moment. But of course, with any challenge, there are some opportunities. I mean, the important thing is that as a woman, you would have to actually raise your hand and feel like, you know, I can do it as well. So that's really what it takes. But certainly white male dominated. And also if you're looking at the big corporates, the big giants, we do know some of the top 3 in the country. And so they've been given service by companies that have been there for many, many years. So you have to then find ways of actually competing with these organizations. So it really requires strategy on how to go about it, and synergies and partnership, really.
There's talk in the industry that for members of the community, it is expensive to make calls. Data is very, very expensive. What do you say to that as you are an industry player at the moment?
Well, certainly government has a role to play in that. I mean, we know that the big debate at the moment is the allocation of the spectrum. Of course, you know, the big giants would then have a concern, because that means that, you know, there's more competition. But for the consumer, this will be great news, because then that means that they have more options. And with any competition, it means that, you know, prices do go down. And so that is one way to actually handle this situation.
Yeah.
And then
there's been expression that, you know, the current development of data must fall, and what companies charge each other for caller termination rates will hurt the industry. We heard Themba Maseko saying that yesterday. What do you say about how the stakeholders like yourselves are going to be affected by changes in the way ICASA is regulating the industry now?
Well, I mean, you know, as a service provider to telcos, big telcos, what that means is that it just gives us more opportunities, because new entrants into the market could go into areas that are underserviced. So we certainly need more investment in the network infrastructure. Yeah,
I said Themba Maseko instead of Sipho Maseko. I beg your pardon there. All right, going forward then now, has the playing field been leveled for women to be, who are interested in the telecommunications center, to enter without any hurdles in place? Because you have experience there. What do you have to say to those who want to enter and going forward?
The truth of the matter is that you have to be bold, but yes, indeed, there are challenges, there are barriers to entry. Certainly, I think a good way to start is really in partnership. Find ways of creating that type of network with people that are already in the industry, and leverage those networks. That's how I started in the industry.
All right. Thank you very much for making time to speak to us.
Thank you so much.
All right. That's Jane Nkadimang, who is the director at Debrox Communications, talking to us about women in the telecommunications sector.